You're listening to Edgereel, skill thrills and business chills. Join hosts Laura and Brian as they explore the skills and insights you need to succeed in today's business world. Let's dive in.
Imagine standing at a crossroads, a big decision just looming over you, and all you've got to help you choose is a coin. Feels pretty familiar, right?
We've all been there.
Yeah, we have. But what if I told you there's a way to make those tough choices without relying on pure chance? That's what we're doing today, tossing out that coin and taking a deep dive into the world of decision making. And trust me, it's a lot more interesting and even funny than you might expect.
We're going to break down the reasons why we find ourselves stuck sometimes, how our emotions can sometimes lead us astray, and most importantly, we're going to give you some practical strategies that you can use to make choosing not only easier, but smarter too.
I think it's wild how much is actually going on in our heads when we have to make even the simplest decisions. Like our brains are throwing these big parties up there and we're just along for the ride. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Decision making is this super complex mix of psychology, neuroscience, even a little bit of behavioral economics gets thrown in there. It's basically our brains working overtime.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of everything around us and pick the best path forward.
Okay, so it's more than just trying to decide between coffee or tea in the morning then.
Definitely. I mean, some choices are as simple as picking a pizza topping, but others, like when you're thinking about switching careers or other big life decisions,
right,
those need a lot more than just a quick coin flip.
Speaking of coin flips, our source makes a really funny point about relying on chance for those huge life choices. Like who would ever put more life savings on the line based on heads or tails? But that emu farm example, it's not just funny. It makes you think about how we make big decisions.
It really does. Big decisions are rarely ever a simple yes or no. They're full of nuance. And if you ignore all those details, it can lead to some, unexpected and sometimes hilarious consequences.
Yeah. So while flipping a coin might be a good way to decide what to have for lunch, right, it's probably not the best strategy when it comes to life-altering choices.
Right. You definitely don't want to bet your retirement plan on a lucky penny. Our source talks about these things they call decision-making pitfalls, which are basically these traps that we fall into without even realizing it. It's like knowing the warning signs before you wander into a spooky forest.
Right.
It always helps to be prepared.
Yeah, being aware of these pitfalls is huge. It's half the battle. The first one they talk about is paralysis by analysis. Have you ever found yourself with too many choices and then you just freeze up?
Oh, absolutely. It's like when you're in the toothpaste aisle staring at this giant wall of options and each one says it's the best. You're so overwhelmed you just leave empty-handed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes having too much information can make it harder to choose. Another pitfall that we all fall into is the sunk cost fallacy. We've all done it. You're watching a terrible movie, but you're like, well, I paid for it.
Oh, yeah.
Even though you'd rather be doing a million other things.
Oh, for sure. But how does that work with bigger decisions?
It's when you stick with something just because you've already invested time or money or effort, even when it's clearly not the best way to go. And this can impact things like careers, relationships, even how long you're willing to wait in the wrong line at the grocery store.
Wow. I never thought of it like that. It's crazy how these things can sneak up on you. Another pitfall our source mentions is groupthink, which I think is interesting.
Groupthink is when you agree with the group just to keep things peaceful, even if you really don't want to. We've all been there.
Totally. It's like when everyone decides to wear matching neon shirts for a group photo and you're just like, oh, fine, even though you know you'll look like a walking highlighter.
Right.
But groupthink is more than just questionable fashion choices.
It can be, yeah. Of course, teamwork and collaboration are important. But blindly following the crowd can lead to some truly disastrous decisions, especially when you don't feel like you can speak your mind. The important thing is to create a space where everyone feels comfortable enough to speak their mind and share their concerns, even if that means disagreeing with everyone else. Wouldn't you rather just speak up about that neon shirt than have to live with the photos later?
That's very true. Speaking up is so important, even when it feels awkward at the moment. So how do we get better at making decisions and dodge all these pitfalls?
That's the million-dollar question. Luckily for us, our source has given us some great strategies that we can add to our decision-making toolbox. And the first one is a classic for a reason. The good old-fashioned pros and cons list.
It seems so basic, but I don't know. There's something so satisfying about seeing all your thoughts laid out in front of you.
Definitely. Writing down all the advantages and disadvantages of each option really helps you visualize what might happen, and it brings a lot of clarity to the decision. It's like decluttering your brain and getting everything out in the open.
Another strategy our source talks about is using decision trees.
Yeah, decision trees. Don't let the names scare you off. Just think of them like flowcharts, but for grown-ups. They help you map out the choices you could make and what might happen because of each choice.
So instead of just thinking about what happens right away, you're thinking about all the other things that might happen down the line because of that first decision.
Exactly. It's like taking a sneak peek into the future, but without needing a time machine.
I like that. Our source also mentions this thing called the 1-0-10-10 rule, which I think is a really neat way to get some perspective.
Oh, yeah. The 1-10-10 rule. What you do is ask yourself these 3 questions. How will I feel about this decision in 10 minutes? In 10 months? And in 10 years? It's like you're having a conversation with your future self.
Right. It makes you stop and think about the bigger picture instead of just what you want right this second. Sometimes what seems super important now really doesn't matter later on. But the choices we're making today, those can really affect our future.
Exactly. It's all about the long game. Now let's talk about getting advice from people you trust. That can be really important when you're making big decisions.
Yeah, for sure. Talking to your close friends, family, maybe a mentor, they can give you some really valuable insights.
Definitely. They can see things from different angles.
Yeah.
Maybe point out things that you haven't even considered, or even just be there to listen to how you're feeling about everything. It's like having your own personal board of advisors to help you navigate those big life decisions.
I like that. But it is important to remember, even though we love them, our pets probably aren't the best ones to go to for life advice.
Right. As much as we love our furry friends, they might not give the most unbiased, objective advice when it comes to really complex issues.
Yeah, I can just imagine asking my cat for career advice.
Yeah.
And getting a blank stare in return.
All right. Now, let's switch gears for a second, talk about emotions and the role they play in our decision-making.
Yeah, it's like our source says. We can't just shut off our feelings when we're trying to make a choice. Emotions are a big part of who we are, and they definitely influence how we see the world and how we make decisions.
It's true. It's like that time I almost blew my budget on a pair of shoes I didn't even need just because I was in a bad mood.
Oh, I've been there. It's about finding that balance, knowing when your emotions are in control and when they're just along for the ride.
Exactly. We got to learn to acknowledge how we're feeling, but not let those feelings make all the decisions for us. That's what effective decision-making is all about.
Our source gave a pretty funny example about how emotions can make us do impulsive things.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about the one where they said you could end up quitting your job because someone ate your lunch?
Yes. It's funny, but it just goes to show how quickly our emotions can take over our rational thinking. It's a good reminder to just take a step back, breathe, and look at things clearly before you make a decision you might regret, especially when you're feeling all those feelings.
For sure. Sometimes you just got to walk away for a minute.
Yeah.
Now, to really drive this point home, our source looks at a couple of real-world case studies.
Yeah, they start with what they call the Great Soda Debacle.
Oh, yeah. That's the one where the company decided to change the recipe for their most popular soda.
You got it. And it totally backfired. They didn't realize how much people loved the original, and there was this huge backlash. In the end, they had to go back to the old formula and call it classic.
It's a classic example of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They really underestimated their audience.
That's for sure. Speaking of missed opportunities, our source also mentions this huge blunder. The Blockbuster blunder.
Oh, tell me you're talking about Blockbuster passing on buying Netflix.
That's the one. It's crazy to think about.
Right.
Blockbuster was the king of video rentals.
Right.
But they completely missed the boat on streaming.
They didn't adapt.
Nope.
And look what happened.
It's a stark reminder to be open to new ideas and to never underestimate the competition.
100%.
Those are 2 really powerful examples. Let's move on to some more tools that we can use to help us make better decisions.
Okay. Sounds good. Have you heard of something called a SWOT analysis?
Sounds pretty official. What is that?
Basically, you're giving your decision a full checkup. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. By looking at these 4 areas, you get this really well-rounded understanding of the situation you're in.
So it's like doing a 360 of your decision, figuring out what's good and bad, both inside and outside of your control.
Exactly. So when you know your strengths and weaknesses, you can use those to your advantage. And then when you're aware of the opportunities and threats, you can capitalize on what's good and be ready for what's coming.
It's like having a secret weapon for making smarter decisions. Now, for people who are more visual, our source mentions this thing called mind mapping.
Oh, mind mapping is great. It's perfect for brainstorming and organizing your thoughts. You're basically creating a visual representation of all your ideas, connecting different concepts and seeing where things might lead.
So it's like making this web of ideas, using colors, pictures, keywords. All those things help you spark your creativity and make connections that you might not see if you just write everything out on a list.
Exactly. It's a really powerful technique to unlock your creativity, explore different ways of thinking, and get a much deeper understanding of complicated issues. Plus, it's a lot more fun than just staring at a blank page, right?
Right.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we have to talk about intuition and how it plays into all of this.
Okay, yeah. Our gut feelings, they can be really strong sometimes. Are they always right?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Our source is clear about one thing. Gut feelings or your intuition can be really helpful, but you shouldn't base every decision on them, especially when you're dealing with big, life-changing stuff.
Okay, so when is it a good idea to trust your gut? And when should you maybe think twice?
Well, they give us some good guidelines. For example, when you've got a lot of experience in a certain area, your intuition can be really valuable.
Right, so if you've been in a similar situation before and your gut led you in the right direction, it might be a good idea to listen to it again.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing patterns. They also say that your gut can be helpful when you're under pressure and need to make a decision fast.
Right, like when you have to slam on the brakes to avoid an accident, you don't really have time to overthink it, you just react.
Exactly. Your intuition just kicks in, and a lot of times
Yeah.
it leads to the best outcome. But again, it's all about finding that balance, using your gut feelings when it makes sense, but also knowing when to use logic and careful thinking. Especially when it comes to those big decisions. That's what this whole deep dive has been about, giving you the tools to do just that.
It really has been an eye-opening conversation. We've learned so much about how our brains work, all those traps we can fall into, and the tools and strategies that we can use to make smarter choices. So we've covered those times when maybe our gut feeling isn't the best guide, but our source also talks about those times when trusting your gut can actually be a good thing.
Right, it all depends. They say that when you have a lot of experience in something, your intuition can be super valuable. Like you develop this sixth sense after years of doing something.
Right.
You can just tell when something's not quite right, even if you can't explain exactly why.
It's like a chef who just knows, without even measuring,
Right.
that the dish needs a pinch more salt.
Exactly. That's experience for you. And sometimes you just don't have time to sit there and analyze every single angle. When you have to make a split-second decision, that's when your intuition can be a lifesaver.
Right, like when you have to swerve to avoid an accident, there's no time to think, you just react.
Exactly. Your gut takes over. And a lot of times, it all works out for the best. But it always comes back to finding that balance, knowing when to trust your gut, and when to take a step back and really think things through, especially for those big life choices. And that's what we've been focusing on today, giving you the tools to do just that.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. We've learned so much about how our brains make decisions, all the ways we can trip ourselves up, and all the different tools and strategies we can use to make better choices. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
You know, if there's just one thing someone takes away from this, I hope it's that becoming a better decision maker is a journey. It's not like you wake up one day and you're suddenly a pro. It takes time. It's about getting to know yourself better, understanding what you're good at and maybe not so good at, and then having this set of tools that you can use to help you work through all those complicated choices that life throws at you. It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware and feeling empowered to make the best choices you can.
I love that. Ditch the coin, embrace the journey, and remember, every decision you make, big or small, is a chance to learn, grow, and create the future you want.
Beautifully said. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep making those decisions with confidence.
And if you find yourself at a crossroads, unsure which way to go, remember, you don't have to figure it out alone. We're always here to help guide you through the fascinating, sometimes funny, world of decision-making.
Absolutely. Until next time, everyone, may your choices be wise, your paths be clear, and your journeys be full of joy.